Hello, everybody. Tom, the very lowest of men here of 6 inviting you back for another episode of Counterplay This is a series in which I look at problem units in the meta and what you, the player, can do to deal with them. I'm actually doing a first requested one this time, which is Scourge, which I was asked to take a look at last time out. So very excited to dig into this. This is a unit I've abused plenty over the last few months. I'm excited to get you through the ins and outs of how this unit works and what you, the player, can do about it. As ever, please do hit like and subscribe. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member, then you can sign up and support us there. It all helps us to make more wonderful content for you guys. So thanks very much. Right, let's get into it. So, Scourge, what's the problem? Well, Scourge are a very frustrating shooting unit for a lot of armies to deal with. They are extremely fast, 14-inch move, flying infantry, so they can go through walls, armed with heavy Dark Lances or Haywire Blasters, right? So good anti-tank or anti-elite shooting in the Dark Lances, and also the potential to be doing dev wounds with the Haywire Blasters. The most powerful feature that Scourge have is the ability to do a 6-inch fire and fade move after shooting. So they jump out from behind a wall, shoot, jump back behind it, which obviously makes it very hard to respond to them and to deal with them, and can mean that they can shoot away for quite a lot of the game. They're very, very good at picking up enemy armor, because they have rerolls that come via the pain token spends in Drukhari or the Eldar rerolls if you're running them in Ynnari. They're very powerful in both. They also have access to the grenade keyword, so when they get close, they can also be spiking a few mortal wounds to help their shooting go through as well. So if we're thinking about what you, the player, need to do about Scourge, we need to apply the same toolkit I've been applying across Counterplay++, and that means thinking about what the opponent wants to happen, what points of failure and weaknesses the unit has, and how you can exploit them in reply. And as ever, it's worth remembering that you have the option of crying about it and praying for nerfs too. Now, Scourge have taken a points nerf this time. Spoilers, I think they're still going to be about. So it's possible the nerfs aren't enough, and you will still need to come up with some solutions as a player to deal with this unit in your games. Let's dig into some of the weaknesses and how we can do anything about it. Ultimately, what the opponent wants from Scourge is a non-interactive, no-cell shooting unit. They want to be able to use the fire and fade to shoot multiple units of Scourge all game without reply, picking off enemy armor and enemy elites, and basically protect us from any response or harm. So the longer the Scourge are alive, the more benefit they get from them. And this is why, even though they're an expensive unit, Scourge can often repay their own points costs across a game very, very aggressively. They also offer very good late game mobility and scoring because of their movement. The 14-inch move plus the 6-inch fire and fade means they can suddenly come flying out to deny primary, to score particular cards, and to get into other positions on the board. So in the late game, once they've picked up their harder targets, it's very common to see Scourge turn into a really annoying blocking or scoring piece, which can also really, really frustrate the opponent. So this is a very non-interactive unit that's looking to exploit its ability to fire and fade to be active throughout the game, cause the opponent's armor and elite units a lot of problems, and then ultimately become a very frustrating spoiler unit in the late stages as well. However, Scourge have weaknesses. Let's think about those. So first off, they are 5 toughness 3 1 wound bodies, 4 up save, 5 up invuln. They're very vulnerable. If you actually get any kind of damage into Scourge, they start dying, and they start dying very quickly. Another important limitation is that although they have a fire and fade, and this is very obnoxious, the fact that they need to be using that 6-inch movement to get back into safety after they have shot does limit the locations on the board they can go. So if you start mapping where Scourge are and where they want to be in terms of being able to shoot and then hide, you will start to see on boards that there are usually a number of islands they want to operate around, right? Either out of the sort of defensive parts of the sort of opponent's own board and the terrain pieces in their deployment, or jumping up and tucking into little staging points further up the board as they start to get a little bit more aggressive and ambitious in where they go. So this does make them mappable. It does make it possible to anticipate where Scourge want to be, where they're likely to be operating, and where they're trying to get to. Next up, they have a ballistic skill of 4 to represent the fact that they're Dark Elves lugging heavy weapons around. They do have the heavy keyword, but because they are moving almost all the time, Scourge very rarely get access to that +1 to hit, which means they're hitting on 4's base. They don't have a huge number of shots. The Dark Lance shots are only 4. The Haywire is 8, so it's low volume shooting. Another important limitation is that if they don't have a valid target, they cannot use their fire and fade. This makes them vulnerable to a couple of different types of counterplay, which we'll discuss in a moment. If a Scourge unit gets stuck out in the open without a valid target to shoot, it's suddenly going to find itself in trouble, unable to fire and fade away. Finally, the weapons themselves are Strength 12 Dark Lances, which are AP 3, and Haywire, which itself is anti-vehicle 4 up to do dev wounds, but otherwise is relying on 6s to do realistic damage into other targets. So the weapons, whilst powerful, have specific profiles that other kinds of profiles can neuter and counter and make a lot less effective. So I think all of this is worth bearing in mind as we go towards how you, the player, can deal with Scourge. So how do we exploit the limitations? Well, there's a whole suite of different options for you, the player. First off is that a lone op strat will ruin Scourge's day. If you have the ability to make your unit untargetable outside of 12 or outside of 18, then Scourge find themselves in a very vulnerable position, because either they have to push closer to you in order to counteract the lone op tools, which leaves them in turn much more vulnerable to being attacked back, or they run the risk of trying to shoot a unit, being caught out by the strat, and then being stranded in the open. So the power of a lone op strat in this matchup is extremely high. It gives you some real counterplays, especially if you have the ability to pop it in different places. So Pack-Bound CSM or Vanguard Onslaught Tyranids have tools here which can catch out Scourge that are trying to pick off enemy vehicles or elites. Secondly, that Ballistic Skill 4 is very vulnerable to minuses to hit if you have stealth, or if you're able to pop smoke. That makes a very big difference to Scourge output. Even with rerolls, Dark Lances hitting on 5s can become incredibly swingy. They're already a bit swingy on 4s, but they are very swingy hitting on 5s. And the Haywire itself also loses a whole bunch of shots, which greatly reduces its output. So being able to pop smoke or having access to stealth drastically reduces the power of Scourge as far as their ability to hit is concerned. Next up, you want Overwatch control lanes. As we've discussed, this is a very flimsy unit. If you have a good Overwatch candidate, whether that's an infantry unit or indeed a vehicle of the kind that Scourge might want to shoot, pushing these into central areas and anticipating, again, using the mapping of where Scourge are, where they want to jump out and where they want to fire and fade, it's possible to identify whole swathes of the board where you can have a good Overwatch control threat, which renders the Scourge incredibly vulnerable, makes it extremely likely that when they jump out, you'll be able to Overwatch and kill most of, if not all of, a unit. This is particularly effective against Haywire Scourge because they have a 24-inch range. So if you have tanks, let's say, for example, a Vindicator or a Gladiator Reaper that Haywire Scourge might want to try and engage with, those units pack an Overwatch threat, which is extremely powerful and well able to annihilate a Scourge unit that is hopping into range. So having good Overwatch candidates and put them into central areas on the board, because although the Scourge can use their fire and fade to operate at a distance, if you push centrally, ultimately you're going to dominate parts of the board that leave them struggling to find pockets they can be in and fire and fade without also being at risk of Overwatch. And you know that you need to hold your Overwatch for these units because these are incredibly valuable units in the opponent's game plan. It's well worth taking the opportunity to Overwatch and kill off a squad of Scourge because, as you say, as established, the opponent's game plan and preference here is to use a Scourge squad for the entire game. So if you have the opportunity to take one out, you're taking out an expensive unit, it's 120 points, and you're drastically reducing your opponent's anti-heavy, anti-elite plan. As far as Dark Lances are concerned, toughness 12 units with a 2-up save are very peaky for them to deal with. They don't like demons, they don't like invuln saves, and they really don't like 2-up saves in cover with Armor of Contempt. Things like Land Forts or Land Raiders are very hard for the Dark Lance Scourge in particular to deal with, though they are a lot more vulnerable to the Haywire Scourge, and that's where you need to couple this with your Overwatch control lanes. Finally, you also want to be keeping an eye on opportunities to hit and kill the Scourge yourself, and you've got a couple of different options for this. There is always indirect fire, there is always artillery. If you start firing artillery at Scourge and they start dying, the opponent doesn't really have any recourse to this. So things like Chaos Knights or Guard with their artillery have a real power here for actually picking Scourge out from cover and dealing with them. Indirect's not as powerful in the game as it once was, but it's still a very potent tool if you do find yourself facing Scourge. Plague Burst Crawler is also very good at killing Scourge. But the other option is fast melee. And this is where having an eye on the pockets the Scourge are trying to operate in and having some kind of very fast melee threat preferably with deep strike, that you can then rapid ingress and stage and then use to go and chase after the Scourge after they have activated in your own turn, is extremely effective. And you can use careful deployment, lone op strats, and other things to draw the Scourge a little bit closer towards the midboard, which then in turn makes it much easier for you to counterattack with your combat units. They're an extremely obnoxious unit and they're not easy to get at, but you want to create a situation where they don't feel safe coming closer and you're controlling the parts of the board that they're firing and fading and operating out of. If you do that, then the opponent might have to take risks, come a little closer, at which point your chances of catching them out with a unit of Storm Boys or Warp Talons or whatever else become a lot higher. So you need to keep the opponent honest in that sense and keep looking for opportunities to counterpunch and pick up the Scourge if you are able. I think using this combination of tools in the same list is massively potent. And if you are able to exploit all of this, you can nullify the power of Scourges quite considerably and make the opponent make much more difficult choices with a unit that they're really hoping to exploit across the entire game in a whole bunch of different ways. So I think that gives you a lot of different counterplays there, a lot of different ins dealing with Scourge. If I've missed any, do let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you've been working on and what's been working for you in your battle against the Dark Elf Menace. Thank you so much for watching Counterplay Plus Plus. It's been really fun. I'm always enjoying this series. If you've got units you would like to see me cover in the future, please do leave a comment and let me know. I would love to make this a series that is very much delivering on you, the viewers' needs, and keep talking through some of the problem units in the game and how you can manage them. Please do hit like, subscribe, leave us a comment, and remember that you can also become a 6++ member on YouTube, which gets you access to all sorts things, including early release videos and access to our summer TTS league, which we're going to be running. So if you want to come play some games with me and the guys, please do sign up and get involved. Finally, we have a thriving free Discord with a link in the description. We've got a bunch of Drukhari players in there, like myself, talking all things Scourge, but also chats for all different factions, all sorts of regular updates and jokes and fun going on in that Discord. So do come and get involved. That's it for me this time, and I will see you all again very soon. Lowest of Men out. Bye bye.